Okay, so the next topic is this ecological anthropology. Okay, so this is a very important chapter from biological anthropology. Every year they ask one or two questions from this. One question, one 20 marker or a 115 marker is always asked from this particular section. Okay, so here what we have to study is that it's nothing but about ecological anthropology. That means how humans adapt to their environment. So humans are exposed to different kinds of environment and environmental stress. To adapt to that, okay, we have developed various mechanisms, both biologically as well as behavioral or cultural means to adapt to this environment. So we are biologically better adapted than other organisms, so therefore we are distributed across the world. Similarly, cultural factors, the behavioral factors also play a very important role in us adapting to our environment. So we have been able to occupy the driest places, the deserts, the coldest places, okay, the highest mountains. We are able to go and at least be able to go and visit these places, if not permanently live there. But we have population living in hot deserts, we have population that is living in high altitude, dry humid dry condition, humid condition, cold condition. So in all these environment we have to adapt, and this adaptation is because of human variation. Again we are studying this under the concept of human variation, because there is variation in humans because of them occupying different environment. So that is what we need to understand in this particular chapter, that is ecological anthropology, human variation because of their adaptation to different environment. Okay, so what is this? It is a study of the mechanism of human adaptation to different environmental condition is known as ecological anthropology. Okay, so it's an interdisciplinary study because you are not only studying the human physiology but also the environmental factors. So ecology also you are studying the physiology also, you are studying the biology, anthropology point of view also, that is cultural aspects, etc. So it's a multidisciplinary subject. So you need biologists, you need ecologists, you need anthropologists, sociologists, etc. to contribute to this study so as to understand ecological anthropology or how human adapt to different environment. So any change in environment elicits response from human at different level, at population level and at individual level. That is what we have to study. Just understand here, you can go back and read. So try to understand that the human adaptation or the variation to adapt to the environment can occur at the population level or at the individual level. See, for example, individual level, now you go on trekking to high altitude, let's say Himalaya. So what changes occurs in you? You start breathing heavily, okay, you are not able to perform efficiently as you would perform at the lower level. Yes or no? Because there is more oxygen demand, okay, at the higher altitude because there is less oxygen in the environment. So at the individual level certain changes can occur. Yes, for example you go to a cold climate, what happens? Suddenly if I reduce the AC temperature, what will happen? You start shivering. So that is your way of adapting to cold temperature. So response can occur at the individual level. Similarly, the population living in different region would have developed certain response. Now for example, people living in equatorial region, they are dark colored, whereas people living in around the polar region, they are fair, okay, they are light colored. Why? Because the population has adapted to the environment. So in the equatorial region there is more sunlight, so therefore the skin is dark in color for them to adapt to the UV rays, to protect their skin from the harmful UV radiation. So therefore it is dark colored. What about the people in the polar regions or around the polar region, temperate region? Their skin is light colored. Why? Because their solar radiation is less, okay, and they have to produce vitamin D. The vitamin D is produced by the skin and the precursor is present beneath the skin. So therefore they need to be fair so that the sun's rays are allowed through the skin, and therefore they are able to produce vitamin D. Vitamin D is essential for bone and immunity. So there in the temperate region there is less sun, if the skin is already pigmented, it will not allow the sun rays. I hope you understood. So at the population level you will have also different types of adaptation. So human response can take place at different level. So ecological anthropology studies this variation at the population level as well as at individual level. Now from the exam point of view, this we will try to understand generally, but from the exam point of view they can ask question, how human adapts to hot climate, how human adapts to cold, and how human adapts to high altitude. So these are the three types of essay type question that can be asked in your examination. Every year one or the other is asked. How you adapt to hot climate, how you adapt to cold, and how you adapt to high altitude. The mechanism is different in all of them. We will try to understand the underlying principle of adaptation, and then we will go into each of them individually how they get adapted. Is that okay? Right. So this is what is ecological anthropology, studying human adaptation at the population level and at the individual level to different environmental conditions, and the stress the environment throws at you, okay, is known as ecological anthropology. So the method of study, so it is a multi-dimensional, and the adaptation is multi-dimensional and multi-hierarchical. That means short term something happens, on a long term something happens, over generation something happens. See, for example, now if you are living in high altitude, so in high altitude you have low oxygen as well as cold temperature. At high altitude you have cold temperature as well as low oxygen. So if you go to high altitude now today, what will happen? Immediately you need to adjust. So what happens? You start breathing heavily. Yes, so that is immediate response. There is cold, so you start shivering. These are all immediate. So that is the first level. The second level is after 10 days, 15 days, your body would have started producing more RBC, more hemoglobin will be there in your body. Okay, so therefore you would start feeling better than what you would have felt when you went to that place in the first place. Yes or no? 10 days you start adjusting to that place. This is known as acclimatization. So 10 to 15 days you start acclimatizing. Yes, so that is the next level. Then the third level is, if you were born in high altitude, people who would have born and brought up in high altitude, they would have developed bigger chest. Okay, they would have developed bigger chest, more more RBC in the first place. So that would happen if they would have lived there, born and brought up in that place. So that is the next level. If you were born and brought up there, your adaptation would be much different. Then the population living there, they will be very much different from the population living in the lower lands. I hope you understood. So depending upon the time period you are going to stay there or you have remained in that environment, different kinds of adaptation is seen. So that is why it is multi-hierarchical, short term, medium term and long term, and then over generations. So at different level adaptation can occur. Yes or no? Now you go to cold climate, okay, suddenly you will start shivering. Immediate response is what? Shivering. Yes, but if you see natives who have been living there, they can aram say, with even less clothes, they will be able to be more comfortable. Why? Because they are adapted. So their adaptation is long term, your adaptation was short term. So immediate response, okay, or acclimatization. These are, so depending upon the time period of exposure to the stress, different level of adaptation can occur. So that is why adaptation in human is multi-dimensional and multi-hierarchical. Clothing, they consume lot of fatty diet. So that is socio-culturally. Okay, so that is why it is multi-dimensional. Okay, it is not just one dimension, not just biological, not just cultural, it is multi-dimensional. Biologically, they can adapt either physiologically or genetically. Genetically is seen over generation or population level, whereas physiologically is seen at the individual level. Hence, we need to have an holistic approach to study this adaptation or ecological anthropology. This discipline is known as ecological anthropology. So by definition, if you have to write an introduction to your answer, so ecological anthropology is a part of or a branch of anthropology that is concerned with biocultural or biosociocultural response and the process that helps us to survive, reproduce, develop, longevity and spatial distribution of human population, that allows us to survive, okay, to reproduce, for development, longevity, spatial distribution of human population. Okay, so it integrates the findings of ecology, physiology, socio-cultural anthropology, geography, etc. So that is why it's a multidisciplinary subject. Therefore, it is a multidisciplinary subject. I hope you understood. So this is the introduction to ecological anthropology. Okay, so what is adaptation? So in ecological anthropology, we have to study adaptation. So adaptation is ability to survive, ability to reproduce in any environment and to increase our longevity. So adaptation is all the response an organism undergoes, both structurally as well as functionally, okay, to adapt to its environment. So any response of an organism to the structural and functional characteristic of its environment is known as adaptation. Okay, so adaptation can be through slow gradual adjustment to the environment. Okay, so types of adaptation. So there are different ways so I hope you understood. Adaptation is the response of an organism to the structural and functional dimension of its environment. So the environment throws stress, okay, various kinds of stress on us. We are able to adapt to that, okay, is known as adaptation. So there are different levels or different types of adaptation. So one are mainly three types of response we see in individual level, and at the population level we see genetic change. At the individual level we see regulatory response. Okay, this is very important for you to understand. Under the same framework we will study how to adapt to hot, how to adapt to cold and how to adapt to high altitude. So adaptation can occur, okay, through regulatory response. It can occur through acclimatization response and through developmental response. This is at the individual level. At the population level, there is change in the genetics, genetic change and natural selection that is acting on those genetics. So what is this regulatory response? Regulatory response is rapid. Regulatory response is any response that is rapid, immediate. You go to an environment and you start responding to that environment which is rapid is known as regulatory response. For example, you go to a cold environment, you start shivering. That is regulatory response. You go to cold environment, you wear jacket. That is regulatory response. So regulatory response is very rapid mode of adaptation. It can be physiological or it can be behavioral. You go to high altitude, you start breathing fast. That is physiological. You wear oxygen mask. Himalayan trekkers, they wear oxygen mask. So that is behavioral. So it is very rapid. Example is pulse rate shivering, that is physiological. Behavioral can be clothing and shelter. You go to hot desert, you cover your entire body, you wear sunscreen, lotion, etc. So that is behavioral adaptation. Yes or no? See, when foreigners come to India, they wear lot of sunscreen lotion compared to what we would normally put. Why? Because their their skin does not have melanin pigment to protect themselves from sun rays. Yes, okay, like that. Next is acclimatatory response. So the next level is acclimatization. It takes about 10 to 15 days, longer than regulatory. So it helps us to maintain, helps us to become more comfortable in the environment. So you go to high altitude, first day, second day, you will be, breathing, you can't do anything, you will be sitting, etc. You can't work a lot. After 10 days, you start, acting normally and you start doing work, etc. So that is known as acclimate. It takes slightly longer time. It takes slightly longer time, about 10 days, 2 weeks time. And here there is change in the organic structure. Our body organically starts undergoing change. Functionally, it starts undergoing change. Structural changes starts occurring in our body. For example, in high altitude, our body starts producing more RBCs. Therefore, there will be more hemoglobin, which will compensate to the less oxygen in the environment. Okay, so like that, it occurs when the external stimuli is present for a long period of time. That means if you stay in that environment for like 10 days, if the stimulus is there for 10 days, it is going to have the acclimatory response. So it is usually reversible, like muscles. Exercise you do, you stop exercise, okay, so New Year's you all make a resolution and join gym. So after 15 days you stop going to gym, the muscle is gone. Okay, like that, exercise, etc. Okay, so blood, okay, more blood that is produced in high altitude, you come back, your blood level comes to normal. Okay, next is developmental response. See, these two are reversible, obviously reversible. So when the external stimuli is removed, okay, it returns back to the normal position, whereas developmental is irreversible. Developmental is irreversible. This happens if the individual is born and brought up in that environment. So developmental response occurs when the individual is born and brought up in that environment. So for example, somebody is born and brought up in high altitude, they will have a more lung capacity compared to others. They will have a higher lung capacity compared to others, because while growing only there would be pressure on their lungs. So developmentally their lung would have had more pressure, so lung would have been developed bigger compared to others. So their vital capacity will be more compared to those who are not having that stimulus. Is that understood? Now if they come back to low altitude, they will not, suddenly their lungs will not grow small. That means it is irreversible. This occurs during the growth and development period. It has to occur when the individual is growing and developing. Once they have already developed, if you go, you will not. Okay, so that is what is known as development. They are adjustment to environment that is present during the developmental period. When they are growing, that is what happens. So because of plasticity means our body is able, like a plastic, we are able to mold the plastic into any shape. Same way our body also has the ability to mold itself to the environment. This is known as plasticity. So because of plasticity, the individual develops this kind of response. Example, child growing in high altitude will have lung capacity which is larger compared to others. I hope you understood. Then this is seen at the individual level. These response is seen at the individual level depending upon the period to which they are exposed to. If it is immediate response is regulatory, slightly longer is acclimatatory. If the stress was during growth and development, then the response will be developmental response. So these two are reversible. The developmental is not reversible. Because it takes place during growth and development, which cannot be reversed. Okay. Now this is at the individual level. At the population level, the changes can occur is known as genetic change. For example, the individuals who live in hot desert, it has been found by scientists that they have some kind of a protein, okay, heat shock protein, which binds to damaged tissues. Okay, so therefore it protects their tissue from heat damage. Okay, so that is genetic. Okay, so there is high prevalence of that in those population. In other words, those population which is living in cold region, they are genetically their characteristics, okay, they are shorter, they are stouter, okay, they are more fatty compared to that of the equatorial region. If you see Sudanese, okay, Sudanese, they are all small, thin and long legs, long limbs. Why? In equatorial region, long limbs helps them to lose more heat. Whereas if you see Eskimos, they are all short. Okay, so why? So that they will be able to conserve their heat. This is genetic. This is genetic change. Similarly, Mongoloid race, their eyes, etc., is adapted to cold. So these changes are seen at the genetic level. Even if they are born, say like Sudanese, they have a child in Europe, still the child will have that features. Why? Because those change has taken place at the genetic level and it is seen at the population level. I hope you understood. So, at the individual level, regulatory, acclimatization and developmental. At the population level, genetic changes are seen. Okay. So, this operates, all this mechanism operates by something which is called as negative feedback. That means what the environment throws at you, your body tries to respond to it and try to maintain an equilibrium, homeostasis. It tries to maintain an equilibrium. There is less oxygen outside, so therefore your body will absorb more oxygen or will try to transport more oxygen through more RBCs. I'll repeat again. See, if this is your body, yes, outside if there is less oxygen, okay, in high altitude there is less oxygen. So this acts as a negative feedback mechanism. It acts on your body will start producing more RBC, so therefore there is going to be more hemoglobin. So this will carry more oxygen. So therefore less oxygen is compensated by more hemoglobin. This is known as negative feedback mechanism. The idea is to maintain an equilibrium or homeostasis. Similarly, when there is less water, H2O outside, in desert, there is less water outside. Yes. So therefore, how does your body compromise? It secretes less urine, as an example. So it tries to maintain a balance. So that is what is known as negative feedback mechanism. Ultimately, we want to maintain, our body has to maintain a stable relationship between us and the surrounding. Equilibrium has to be maintained. This is the basic principle. If you understand this, any equation that is asked, hot, cold, etc., can be explained under these headings. What immediate response, what acclimatization response, what developmental response, and what genetic response is seen in hot, cold and high altitude. Simple, no? So this is what is the basic principle, and that's how you have to write your answer also. Only regulatory response, okay, is immediate. Acclimatization is slightly, so these two are reversible. Developmental is non-reversible. Yes. So in regulatory response you have behavioral. Yes. Okay. Whereas acclimatization, development, everything is biological in nature. Okay. Any doubt so far? Okay. So if you see this diagram, so original phenotype, that means original phenotype, or the our ancestor, let's say. Okay, our ancestor. So among the single generation, what all you will see, because of biological plasticity, our body can adapt to the environmental stress, which is known as biological plasticity. Okay, so there is regulatory and acclimatization. You can add that regulatory, okay, acclimatization and developmental. So this modifies the phenotype. Modify regulatory does not modify. Acclimatization and adaptation, it modifies the phenotype. That means there is more blood production. Okay, there is increased size in the chest, etc. If this persists for generation after generation, nature will select those individuals who are better adapted. Natural selection will take place many generations after they get adapted. What is that? Genetically they will be different. So this leads to modified phenotype. So depending upon that, if it is in individual or if it is at the population level, okay, fine. Okay, so response to environmental stress. So what is the stress? So first, whenever you get a question on hot, cold or high altitude, first you have to define the stress in that environment. In hot, what is the stress? What is the stress? Heat, yes. Low humidity, yes, that's all, low lack of water, etc. In high altitude, what is the stress? Low oxygen and cold. So like that, first you have to, even in the material I have given, in the beginning the stress is there, that means the background, the environmental stress. So you have to write about one paragraph on the stress and how human body adapts to that stress. So that stress gives you the premise of our adaptation. So what is the stress? Stress is any factor that interferes with the normal limit of operation. Okay, anything that affects our normal functioning is known as stress. So there is heat that affects our body, there is cold that affects our body, there is less oxygen that affects our body. So the stress is anything that affects our normal functioning. So we respond culturally, physiologically, behaviorally, culturally, psychologically and technology. These are known as behavioral. Okay, physiologically short term and long term. Developmental, that is anatomical change in our body structure. Here there is change in the body functioning. Okay, and then there is genetic change that occurs at the population level. So this is how you will write your as Bergman's rule and Allen's rule, which was asked once, but otherwise while writing your answer you will have to mention this. So they are biologists and they try to study the adaptation of animals in general and humans in particular to different kinds of environment. So the Bergman rule says, Bergman rule deals with the body size. Bergman rule says that we see less massive individual in warm climate and more massive individuals or greater bulk in colder region. This is seen among all your warm blooded animals, mammals, all you see this kind of adaptation. Okay, not only humans, even if you see, okay, in the equatorial region they are much more leaner, less massive. If you see the animals also, if you see the giraffe, if you see the camel, etc., they are leaner compared to the polar bears. Okay, they are massive. Okay, so why they are massive? More bulk means greater cell. Greater cell means more metabolism. More metabolism means more heat generation. More heat generation will help them to adapt to cold climate. On the other hand, okay, less massive individual, they have, okay, less mass to the body surface. Okay, small surface area to body mass ratio, so therefore less heat is lost. Okay, if they are large animal, okay, with less body mass, so therefore they will have less heat loss. This is known as Bergman rule. This is known as Bergman rule. Whereas Allen's rule deals with the limb length of the limbs. So Allen says that near the equator they have longer limbs. Whereas the colder region they have smaller limbs. So near the equator, longer limbs. What is the idea? Longer limbs means they have more surface area. More surface area means more heat is lost, because there is excessive heat. Their body temperature, their core body has to be maintained at a narrow range. It has to be less compared to the surface outside. So more surface area means more exchange of heat. Whereas in the cold region they have to maintain the cold temperature. So that is why there should be less exchange of heat. That's why the limbs are smaller, so that there is less surface area, less heat exchange, therefore more heat is conserved in the body. So if you see the example, yes, so this is Allen's rule and this is Bergman's rule. Example, in the book it is more clear. Okay, the Sudanese people, they are tall and all that. If you see the the marathon runner, the Jamaican, etc., they are marathon runner, they are all lean and but if you see the people from, say, the temperate region, etc., they are shorter, stouter, well built. Yes, so this is Bergman and Allen rule. So this is what is your genetic adaptation to environment.